Evils and Remedy. Under this caption, O.S. Fowler, in his work entitled Amativeness, has spoken to the point. May the reader feel the force of his timely admonitions. A few palpable facts. A single physician in a factory village of some 2,000 or 3,000 inhabitants only had at one time over 70 venereal patients, besides many who were under the care of other doctors in the place. Look at the practice of those who advertise to cure this class of diseases. Catechize physicians on this point. Cast your eye over almost any newspaper, and then see how much of their relative space is occupied with advertisements of cures and practitioners of certain delicate diseases. This diabolical business advertises double and quadruple above any other. This tells the doleful story, and the countless bills, half of all you see posted up in all our cities, echo its saddening notes. Madame Restel's riches and murders re-echo more plaintive still the groans and woes of unhallowed passion. A physician recently avowed his belief that if, by a secret means, however painful or dangerous, he could prevent progeny, he could make a princely fortune in a year. Thank God no one has found out a specific preventive, nor ever should, because this will throw open the floodgates of passion and trample under the foot of unbridled lust nature's great ordinance, nature's great laws. Here our newsboys either boast of their licentiousness, or else tantalize those whose native modesty is not yet wholly effaced of their failure. What kinds of edibles command the highest price in the market? Those that stimulate this passion, and because they create impure desires. What mean those oyster stews and crab parties and terrapin soups and squab suppers, wild fowls, cloves, and a host of other things, eaten in many instances in high life, expressly to beget unhallowed desires? O shame, where is thy blush? Do you want more proof? Behold the fertile South. But particulars are too revolting, both as regards to the beastly indulgence of whites with blacks, and the number of rakes and harlots among the latter. Our world is literally full of sensuality. O virtue, how few worship at thy holy shrine, or keep thy robe of spotless innocence unstained with carnality. To say what proportion keep their robes white, and know only their lawful companions, it is difficult to say, but not many stones would be cast if they alone cast them. Alas, how few observe the seventh commandment, and how almost universally is chastity sacrificed to lust, in one or other of its forms. But even this is not all, is not the most, is not the worst. One other form of this vice is doubtless little less appalling, and another is probably even more so. Reference is had, first to excessive indulgence in wedlock, and next to private sensuality. Few know that any excess of the former, however great, can possibly be sinful, and almost all suppose that marriage entitles to its right in any desired excess. But does marriage entitle the parties to kill each other or themselves? Little do we realize how many are dying continually around us from this sole cause. How and why this proves thus injurious we shall see hereafter. Would that we could here end this painful chapter. Its worse, because most common form, still remains untold. We refer to self-abuse. You look surprised. A false alarm, you exclaim. Impossible. But put it to any numerical test you please. Catechize promiscuously every boy you meet, and then say, if 9 in every 10, from 11 years old and upwards, and half, from 7 to 11, do not practice more or less. Many who deny in words own up in deed, by the shame manifested, a sure sign of guilt. Of those still older, the proportion is greater yet. Question the keepers of our hospitals for bad boys and poor children. A friend took a boy about 10 years old from an asylum for poor and orphan children, and finding that he took every opportunity when alone to perpetuate this filthy practice, chastised him often and severely, but to no purpose, and finally kept his hands tied behind him as the only preventive, but at length disposed of him as incorrigible. The boy has since died. I have known boys not yet 4 years old both practice it and also indulge with the opposite sex, and known hundreds ruined by it before they entered their teens. Nor are any children safe from this loathsome habit. Especially are our schools the nurseries of this vice, where it is often practiced in companies. I speak what I do know, and testify what I have seen. Nor are any of our own dear children, though watched however closely, safe from this corrupting and deadly snare. Nor am I alone in this view of its extensive practice among children. Dr. Woodward, higher authority than whom I could hardly quote, writes thus touching this matter: "Those who hold these opinions, namely that information on this subject is either unnecessary or injurious, are hardly aware how extensively known this habit is with the young, or how early in life it is sometimes practiced. I have never conversed with a lad 12 years of age who did not know all about the practice, and understand the language used to describe it. Remember, he who expresses himself thus strongly is a cautious, discreet man, and always says much less than he means. So alarming does he regard this evil that he has devoted a work to its exposition, entitled Hints to the Young. William C. Woodbridge, so long and so ably devoted to the cause of education, and whose means of knowing was extensive, thus writes in that able work, The Annals of Education, a topic in physiology which artificial modesty has covered up, until a solitary but fatal vice is spreading desolation throughout our schools and families, unnoticed and unknown. Thousands, says E.M.R. Wells, a distinguished teacher in Boston, of pure-minded and amiable boys and young men are undermining their physical constitutions and prospectively corrupting their souls by a pleasurable, and to many of them, an innocent gratification. What, says a fond parent, our high schools and colleges contaminated with this vice? Even so, they are the most infected. First, because their boys are highly organized, and such experience proportionally greater pleasure and injury. And secondly, this vice preeminently is catching, especially as they commingle thus freely with each other. In the footnote it says, "This sending children to school, however select, is a most grievous evil, because as children are imitative creatures, all the bad habits of all the scholars are adopted by all the others. Our common schools are complete nuisances, by thus propagating vice, nor can the evil be remedied till parents educate their children." An English medical author remarks, "Some children escape this knowledge till puberty. The majority, it is to be feared, however, commence earlier. Schools generally have the credit of germinating this enervating fascination, but it is also acquired from the tuition of associates at home, from servants, relations, and others with whom they sleep. Concealment, says A. Walker, is quite impracticable. Ruinous and prevalent as this practice is among boys, it does not end with childhood, but extends its sway and deepens its power as adolescence increases. One would think this a merely boyish, foolish practice which age would correct, but years only serve to increase it. I do not delight to scandalize my fellow men. I would not trespass upon the reader's credulity, but I solemnly declare, as my deliberate conviction, that few of my own sex wholly escape this snare, while thousands on thousands die annually from this one cause. My sources of information are not few, nor limited, nor recent. This work I have contemplated for 10 years, and of course directed my observations and inquiries accordingly. I have been consulted in cases almost without number by those on the brink of ruin who sought relief from its consequences. I know its subjects by its infallible signs, and go where I will. In the busy street, in the lecture room, in the family, they throng me like leaves in autumn. One who knows and is connected with West Point Academy said he believed it to be practiced very generally at that institution, and that the debility occasioned thereby was the reason why so many of its students were unable to pass the examination. In 1841, on application from the author of Facts and Important Information for Young Men, in a communication to him on this subject, I expressed my views as follows. Philadelphia, September 8, 1841. Mr. G. Dear Sir, your letter and book are received. I am glad you have taken hold of this subject. Much as reform is needed in other matters, no reform, no, not even that in reference to alcoholic drinks, is demanded half as much as in reference to this solitary vice. To this conclusion my practice, which you know, has not been limited, and my means of information, which have been varied and extensive, have led me reluctantly, but inevitably. And what is most deplorable, unlike other forms of vice, which prey upon the coarse and the vulgar, this is even more likely to attack those of fine feelings and ardent temperaments, and otherwise unblemished morals. They are not aware that this is one of the greatest sins that they can commit. I have of late seen this evil to be so alarming, and its ravages on the intellect and morals and health so fearful, that I have contemplated preparing a work on the phrenological organ of vomitiveness, to consist mainly of the physiological, intellectual, and moral effects of this vice. But I rejoice that you are before me in this matter. I could give you a vast number of facts that have come to my knowledge. A few days ago a young man, who had been a gentleman, called upon me, in a state of mind and body truly wretched, the mere wreck of a man. His head was affected and painful, the back part of it in particular, and his mind was literally distracted with these horrors which this indulgence always induces. His mind was flighty, his appetite destroyed, and the tones of his voice the very personification of grief. Both his head and his conversation gave evidence of superior talents in ruins. 50 times in the course of an hour did he exclaim, "Oh my God, what shall I do? I am mad, I know it. What can I do?" In laying open his case, in order that I might give him advice, he mentioned his having been much addicted to this habit, and would often bring his hand to these parts, an invariable sign of their being in a fevered state, either by secret indulgence or indulgence with the other sex. His anxiety was to escape the madhouse and regain self-control, because on this he had always prided himself. On inquiring of him as to the prevalence of this evil, he said that 9/10 of his acquaintances were given to it.